Today, we are going to talk about earthquake machines and whether one was used to cause the catastrophic meltdown of the Russian Chernobyl reactor that was located in what is now Ukraine. The official cause of the Chernobyl disaster, as determined by international investigations, was a flawed reactor design coupled with serious mistakes made by the plant operators during a safety test. But Thomas E. Bearden, a retired U.S. Army lieutenant colonel and nuclear engineer, disagrees. Bearden believes that an earthquake machine based on scalar energy caused the Chernobyl disaster when the owners attempted to shut the machine down. The concept of an earthquake machine or technology capable of inducing seismic events has been discussed by a few other individuals and in various speculative theories. In this video, we are going to discuss what an earthquake machine is and if there is any evidence that one caused the Chernobyl disaster. But first, if you enjoy my videos, please like, subscribe, and share with your friends. Also, if you enjoy this video and want to support the channel, consider leaving a super thanks. Your contribution helps me create more great content for you. Thank you. For those of you who may not know, the Chernobyl disaster, which occurred on April 26, 1986, is the worst nuclear power plant accident in history. It happened at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant in the then Soviet Union, near the town of Pripyat, now in Ukraine. The official narrative is that the disaster was caused by a combination of a flawed reactor design, the RBMK reactor, and serious mistakes made by plant operators during a safety test. The test was meant to simulate a power outage, but improper execution led to an uncontrolled reaction. During the test, a sudden power surge led to explosions in Reactor 4, blowing off the reactor's lid and exposing the core. Reactor 4 became operational just 3 years before the meltdown, though Reactor 1 had been operating for nearly 10 years before Chernobyl. This caused a massive release of radioactive material into the atmosphere. The explosion was followed by a fire that burned for 10 days, spreading radioactive particles across Europe. The nearby town of Pripyat, home to plant workers and their families, was evacuated 36 hours after the explosion. Initially, 31 people died as a direct result of the explosion and acute radiation sickness. However, the long-term health effects, including cancers and other radiation-related illnesses, have impacted thousands more. The exposure, especially in the early days following the disaster, led to an increase in birth defects. Studies have reported an increase in congenital abnormalities, including neural tube defects, such as spina bifida, heart defects, and other developmental disorders in children born to parents exposed to radiation from the disaster. Thyroid abnormalities and other endocrine-related conditions were also observed. Belarus was one of the most affected regions, with a significant increase in birth defects and other health issues reported in the years following the disaster. The contamination of land and food sources contributed to the prolonged exposure of the population to radiation. Similar increases in birth defects and other health problems were observed in Ukraine and Russia, particularly in areas close to the Chernobyl site. The Chernobyl area, known as the exclusion zone, remains heavily contaminated. The accident released 400 times more radioactive material than the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima. The World Health Organization, WHO, estimates that thousands of people have developed cancers, particularly thyroid cancer, as a result of radiation exposure. The disaster led to significant economic costs, including the loss of the plant, decontamination efforts, and healthcare costs. It also caused long-term social and psychological effects on those displaced and affected by the radiation. Chapter 3: Earthquake Machines. The concept of an earthquake machine or technology capable of inducing seismic events has been discussed by a few other individuals. Nikola Tesla, the famous inventor and electrical engineer, is often associated with the idea of an earthquake machine. In 1898, Tesla claimed to have developed a small mechanical oscillator that could induce vibrations. He attached this device to a steel beam in his laboratory, causing a noticeable vibration throughout the building. According to Tesla, one version of his oscillator caused a significant disturbance in his laboratory in New York City in 1898. The story goes that while experimenting with the oscillator, Tesla tuned it to the natural resonant frequency of the building in which his lab was located. The vibrations allegedly grew so strong that they began to shake the building and nearby structures, causing what felt like a small earthquake. Realizing the potential danger, Tesla reportedly used a sledgehammer to stop the machine before it could cause any serious damage. He later claimed that if he had continued the experiment, the vibrations could have escalated, possibly causing significant structural damage to the building or even the surrounding area. This incident contributed to the myth of Tesla's earthquake machine. Do you think our leaders would have destroyed a technology with such power? Or would they turn it into a secret program and lie to you that it's not being done? What do you think? Is it possible to create a man-made earthquake? Let's explore a little more. The HARP facility in Alaska has also been attributed with the capability of being used as a weapon to manipulate weather, create natural disasters, or even induce earthquakes. I did a video on HARP recently and will link it at the end of this video. Chapter 4. Thomas E. Bearden. As mentioned earlier, Thomas E. Bearden has spoken about scalar interferometers, which he claims could create earthquakes and other natural disasters. Bearden's bio states that he is a theoretical conceptualist active in the study of scalar electromagnetics, advanced electrodynamics, unified field theory, KGB energetics weapons and phenomena, free energy systems, electromagnetic healing via the unified field action of extended Sachs-Evans electrodynamics, and human development. Tom Bearden invented and patented a free energy device called the Motionless Energy Generator, MEG, and for over 20 years worked with John Bedini on the theory and practicalities of a free energy motor. Together, they published a practical guide to over-unity generators in the book Free Energy Generation. Bearden was convinced that there is a solution to the energy demands of the world that would also free humanity from submission to energy monopoly. According to Bearden, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, a group called Makusa supposedly leased this machine. However, when the group could no longer afford the lease, the process of shutting down the machine allegedly led to the Chernobyl disaster in 1986. Bearden suggests that the malfunction or improper shutdown of this device might have triggered or exacerbated the nuclear reactor explosion. I could find no reference to a group named Makusa. Rather, it appears to be an anime character in today's world. Bearden's theories are based on the concept of scalar waves, which he describes as non-Hertzian, longitudinal waves that differ from the standard transverse electromagnetic waves, such as light, radio waves, etc. He suggests that these waves are associated with the manipulation of the vacuum state or the zero-point energy field, which I also described in a video that will be linked at the end. In a scalar interferometer, two or more scalar wave beams are directed to intersect at a distant point. According to Bearden, when these waves interact, they can create various physical effects, such as energy bursts, temperature changes, or even seismic disturbances, earthquakes. This is similar in concept to how conventional interferometers use the interference of light waves to measure distances or other physical properties, but with scalar waves. Bearden has theorized that scalar interferometers could be used for various purposes, including weather modification, the creation of earthquakes, or even as weapons capable of producing catastrophic effects at great distances. He claims that such technology might have been developed or experimented with by military powers, particularly during the Cold War. Thomas E. Bearden died April 11, 2022. Chapter 5. Tectonic Weapons. Certain countries, including Russia, have indeed developed or experimented with technology capable of inducing earthquakes. Yet the official narrative is that the concept of inducing earthquakes through technological means, often referred to as tectonic weapons, is strictly speculative. Except, there are additional programs, in addition to HARP, that have reportedly developed or deployed technology capable of reliably inducing earthquakes. The first is again in the U.S. under Project Plowshare. During the Cold War, the U.S. conducted a series of nuclear tests under Project Plowshare, aimed at using nuclear explosions for peaceful purposes, such as creating canals or stimulating natural gas reserves. Now maybe it's me, but digging a canal with nuclear explosions seems a bit extreme and risky. Coincidentally, some of these underground nuclear tests resulted in seismic activity that resembled earthquakes, leading to speculation that the technology could be used to induce earthquakes intentionally. Whether these tests were designed for tectonic disruption or not, the fact remains that we have and can create such seismic effects with nuclear explosions. Project Plowshare was eventually abandoned due to environmental concerns. Similar to the US, there have been rumors that the Soviet Union explored tectonic weapons during the Cold War. The basis for these claims often revolves around the Soviet Union's extensive nuclear testing program, which, like the US, produced seismic effects. Project Plowshare operated from 1957 to 1977, so we were playing with tectonic weapons in the 60s. Do you think they have made any progress in deliberately creating earthquakes in the last 65 years? It has become clear to me during this investigation that an earthquake machine has definitely been created. At least the United States and Russia have the technology to create an earthquake, and it's much simpler than many other technologies that they have suppressed, so we know they can cause an earthquake. The question for the purposes of this video is, did they cause the meltdown of Chernobyl? To determine if they used their technology to destroy the Chernobyl nuclear facility, we must look at additional circumstances around that time. Though he was a very educated genius, I couldn't find solid evidence that Chernobyl was an event caused by an earthquake machine as alleged by Bearden yet. While I did not read Bearden's entire book, I did a search of the U.S. Geological Survey database, and there were no earthquakes recorded in Ukraine between January 1st and June 6, 1986. So this does not support Bearden's theory of an earthquake near Chernobyl at this time. Also, in reviewing Bearden's book, the accusation that a Tesla earthquake machine was used near Chernobyl appears to be presented as a theoretical explanation and not based in reality. This doesn't mean it didn't happen, just that the USGS has no tectonic activity during the time. The last thing that I considered is the political atmosphere at the time, and I learned that Ukraine had been protesting for their independence for decades prior to the meltdown. Throughout the 1980s, Ukraine was a Soviet Socialist republic within the USSR, under tight control by the Communist Party. The Soviet Union was experiencing economic stagnation, political repression, and increasing public dissatisfaction. Ukraine nationalist sentiment persisted, and the late Soviet period saw growing unrest and demands for greater autonomy. The catastrophic explosion at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant in northern Ukraine was a pivotal event. The Soviet government's delayed and inadequate response exacerbated public mistrust and anger. The disaster exposed the failures of the Soviet system, sparking environmental and nationalist movements in Ukraine. The People's Movement of Ukraine, known as Ruch, was established as a pro-reform and independence movement in 1989. On July 16, 1990, the Verkhovna Rada, Ukraine's parliament, adopted the Declaration of State Sovereignty, asserting Ukraine's right to self-determination, supremacy of Ukrainian law, and control over its own resources. This was a significant step toward independence. Lastly, Bearden claimed that there was another earthquake machine in Norway at the time. Years ago, some friends in Norway told me that the country employed thinkers who were paid and given housing in the Lapland region, which lies largely within the Arctic Circle. They did this because the uninhabited region is vulnerable to attack by Russia. Norway is a relatively neutral country, and I found no evidence that they created earthquake machines, and they certainly wouldn't be providing land for Russia to house one because they feared invasion by Russia. In my opinion, there are two possible scenarios that should be investigated further. The first being that Russia knew they were going to lose Ukraine and that they destroyed the reactor before Ukraine took ownership after their independence. The second scenario is that Ukraine created the meltdown to further advance unrest among the people of Ukraine, which eventually led to their independence. Without proof of either scenario, we must conclude that Chernobyl was an accident due to faulty parts unless further evidence arises. The Chernobyl disaster stands as a catastrophic example of the dangers associated with nuclear power, highlighting the importance of rigorous safety protocols and the potential for widespread environmental and human harm if we are to continue using such technologies. But a more comprehensive review of classified records would likely be necessary to determine with certainty if Chernobyl was indeed an accident. Tell me what you think. Did either Russia or Ukraine deliberately cause the meltdown that caused so much destruction and harm to the human race? If such evidence is ever found, it would certainly be a punishable crime against humanity. Keep using your brain, guys. It begins to open up the 90% of your brain that most people don't use.